Okay, so hi guys, today we're here with Michael Alexis. He's a lawyer from Canada. He has started multiple successful businesses in the past. He made more than six figures as a freelance writer, and among other things, he also interviewed many influencers like Neil Patel, Derek Halpern, Ramit Sethi, and fun fact about him, he even learned to speak Chinese as a foreigner. But today, we're not going to be talking about any of those things. Today, we're going to be talking about something different. So Michael Alexis, at his website, michaelalexis.com, has a couple of amazing guides on behind the scenes of some of the most successful entrepreneurs and bloggers out there. So, for example, he created a guide on how Ramit Sethi creates landing pages for $1 million. He created a guide on how Derek Halpern got his first 10,000 subscribers, and even how Andrew from Mixergy.com created his recurring revenue business practically out of nothing. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to take a behind-the-scenes look at, how he got started, the process of creating these guides, the barriers that he was facing, and then also the opportunities that those guides opened up for him. So, hi, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, cool. So, maybe let's just get started. Before you had michaelalexis.com, you had another website where you were doing a lot of interviews with influencers like Ramit Sethi. So, what made you, change that? What made you go from that website and that idea to creating these long, extensive written guides and interviews?
Yep, so writerviews.com is a site that I started because I was inspired by Andrew Warner's Mixergy. Andrew was the first person I ever followed online, and after 6-8 months, whatever, paying attention to his interviews, he actually released a guide. It was called Interview Your Heroes, and you can still find it. Just Google Interview Your Heroes, it'll come up. And I saw that, and I thought, well, blogging, writing is something I'm really interested in. Would I want to do it as a profession? I don't know. But interviewing seems like a good way to find that out. So I interviewed, Neil, Ramit, Derek, and Anna Hoffman, and a handful of other people, not because I was hoping that Writer Views would turn into the biggest business in the world, or even that I'd be able to sell products from it, but because I wanted to learn from the people that had already done it to see if, it fit my vision of what I wanted from my life, my vision of what I wanted my life story to be. So eventually, those interviews came to a point where I was starting to receive all of these offers for work, and, the opportunity to work inside I Will Teach You to Be Rich or some of these other companies, I figured would have even more learning opportunity, plus the benefit of income that comes with it. So it was continuing on the same path, but you're right, there was a stark difference. And the decision that I had to make was, I'm going to let this project die and move on to this new type of work.
Okay, cool. One of the things that I really love about your approach is your approach to testing. So, you said that you wanted to test out and see what your vision was and something like that. So I know that you've always done a lot of testing like this. Like, for example, for a little while you worked at restaurants. Then, of course, obviously now you're a lawyer. You did writing, you did interviews, all of these things. Nowadays, a lot of people who are just starting out with ownership, they don't know exactly what they want to do in their lives, and they're just stand there and say like, oh, I don't know what to do. Can you explain a little bit, what your approach is to figuring out what you want in your life?
So now is going to be different than the past. Now I'm becoming a lot more focused on, I have my law firm and I have a side project that I like, right? It gives me a creative outlet. It gives me something to do in the spare time between clients, etc. But now there's a lot of focus. In the past, when, I was going back as far as high school student, undergrad student, even law student, as a student, you have an enormous amount of free time. And my mindset was always, give me something to try, I'll do it the best I can, and, if it leads somewhere, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. So, restaurants, where do restaurants come from? I was 15 years old, I needed a job, and there was an opportunity at a restaurant. I went to wash dishes. I dug it. I liked working in a kitchen. The team, the camaraderie is good. So then you become a cook, and then you learn about food safety, and then you're doing management stuff. As long as you're doing a good job at whatever it is, people will offer you more opportunities. And I think that's what I've always been hungry for, more opportunities. Similarly for, the writing or, teaching myself how to program or taking on Chinese. I didn't think at the time that I was studying Chinese that it was going to be like this really functional thing in my career. I thought, well, I'm a university student. I'm kind of bored with how easy all of these other classes I have are. What's the hardest thing I can do? So I signed up for 2 semesters of Chinese. It was a lot of fun. The teacher offered to take us all to China. I spent my first summer in there, fell in love with it, and went back a couple more times. And that's actually provided, a pretty solid arc for the story of my life for the last 5 or 6 years or whatever, right? Spending time in China, trying to do business there, learning the language well enough that I can use it in my practice now. It's, a lot of things that you can't forecast if you're, sitting in your room wondering about, should I do this, should I do that? I couldn't see that far in the future. It's hard to see like 1 week in the future, let alone 5 years. But the willingness to try whatever comes your way and, the ability, the mindset that you're going to do it well will take anybody very far. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so on that topic, for a lot of people, when you give them the idea of moving to China for half a year or for a year or something like that, or even creating an online business or anything else, like they will have these fears and thoughts in their head. They're like, oh, but I don't have enough money. I don't know. I don't have enough time. I'm not qualified to do this. What if I fail? And stuff like that. Did you have similar thoughts in your head? And if yes, how did you overcome these barriers?
Okay, so with smaller projects, no. For something like setting up a website, especially when it was like a part-time thing that I did while I was in school, there wasn't a lot of fear. But for larger projects, absolutely. When I first thought about moving to China, here's what went through my head. All of my friends are finishing up school, they're getting married, they're buying houses, they're like working nice safe jobs and earning enough money and saving some money. It's like comfortable life, right? The American dream, Canadian dream. So I really had to come to terms with, the fear of losing out on that kind of life. Eventually, maybe I can go into a little bit longer of a story here. There's Andrew Warner, again, I've mentioned him. So Andrew Warner, Mixg.com. I think about a year and a half, 2 years ago, he released this short video on his site, and he just said, like, entrepreneurs are afraid of things. What are you afraid of? I left this long comment. It resonated with a lot of people. And from that, Andrew ended up creating a course that he calls True Mind. The process was, it's almost too simplistic, but there's a magic to it where you write down that negative chatter you have in your mind. All of these things like, I'm not good enough, or I don't know how to do it, or, oh, somebody else is going to do this better than me, or I don't have the money, or whatever it is. And then you challenge those one by one, and then you replace them with positive thoughts, and then there's habit building that goes along with replacing them. So that was actually huge for me to actually, I can say in my mind, as I often did, like, oh, but I don't want that life that my friends have, at least not right now. I don't want that life. But when you write it down on paper, and when you take that paper and you talk to other people about it, and you actively replace it with, the life that I do want is X. I do have the ability to do Y. It's a very, very empowering thing. So that's some of the internal challenge that I used to deal with that, it still pops up every now and then, but, now there's a system for dealing with it. Awesome.
I love how you systematize things because, that's what, for example, for everything I do, having systems that you've created in the past, that that they can give you so much more confidence with achieving anything in life. For example, when I was just starting out, I was worrying a lot about like, oh, what if I fail? What if this happens? What happens? And then when I saw, success stories from other people, I would think to myself, well, that might work for someone else, but it might not work for me, and then I would just do nothing, I wouldn't even try, I would disqualify myself, wouldn't get anything done. Now that a lot of entrepreneurs have systems created that they don't work, like life opens so many opportunities. Because, for example, right now I can probably write down pretty much any goal in the world. Like, I can't say, okay, I'm gonna, become the NBA dunk champion or something like that because I'm not very tall and that's maybe a bit unrealistic. But if I want to make $1 million, I could probably do that. It might not happen in a year or 2 years, but I know that if I dedicate my time to it, study the people who've already done it, use their systems, create my own systems, I know that I can do it. And as I said, very, very empowering. And I think it's a big, difference between a lot of people. Like some people say, oh, I'm not sure if that's going to work for me. Whereas you can say, I'm going to make this work for me no matter what. And that, at least for me, has, completely changed everything. Have you had a similar experience in the past?
Yeah, and I think this is a really valuable conversation because it's something that nobody talks about. People love to say, oh, you're not doing this because of fear. You're afraid of success or whatever it happens to be. But actually, I think there's a really interesting distinction to be made between that, internal barriers as well as the external ones, right? The practical ones. Like you said, you're not going to be the NBA dunker because you're not tall enough. I'm not going to be the NBA dunker because I don't have the skill for it. And I'm not willing to work for the skill for it, and it may or may not ever come anyways. But, whatever you're doing, maybe it's setting up a website. The internal chatter says you don't know how to do it. The external things are like, okay, maybe you don't know how to do it, but you can learn. But what else is there? There's the technology isn't up to date, so it's hard to work with now. So, for example, software. Software is something in my law business that was made 30 years ago, and it was only ever made to run on Windows. The problem with that is, I had to buy a Windows computer. Fine, you can overcome that. So again, the difference is internal barriers, look inside yourself, challenge them one by one, and replace them with something positive. For external barriers, you're looking at, trying to get really granular to overcome the steps that you can.
Okay, so let's take a look at an example. What if you want to become the president of America? Can you find a guide for that or something like that?
Right, you'd hope that you could, but probably not, because the presidents aren't writing it, and anybody that would hasn't done it themselves. But what you can do is you can break that down into its component parts. So, how to become president, ridiculous. But one of those sections might be how to become the mayor of, a small town in the US. And that section breaks down into how to network and how to get funding. And how to get funding breaks down into direct mailing and setting up bank accounts. And once you get granular enough, there is a how-to guide for what you want to do. Google how to raise funds for a mayor election, and you're going to find a guide. By getting to that specific step, you give yourself the tools. You empower yourself to be able to overcome these little problems. And if you don't find an answer, you're doing something wrong. You haven't gotten granular enough, or you're on the entirely wrong path.
Love it. I love how you break things down. And I think something that would be really interesting for the listeners of this podcast would be if we take a look at how we can break something down, like, for example, creation of one of your guides. Let's say you wanted to create a guide on how Derek Halpern got his first 10,000 subscribers. People would be like, whoa, where do I even start? Do I do some research? If yes, where? What do I even do? Do I just start writing? So what's the process that you use to create these guides?
Yeah, let's do two things. One, I'll cover this on a very high level because I think it's useful to have it here. But two, I'm going to direct everybody again to michaelalexis.com. I actually recently did an interview where I went through this meticulous step by step, and we don't need to repeat it for them. They can get it there. So high level, this is what it looks like. I decide on the source, and I see three main sources. One is interviewing people yourself. For example, I interviewed Ramit. I wrote an article about it. Two is looking at interviews that other people have done. I looked at, and courses, 2 or 3 mixture courses and interviews to be able to put together the guide about Andrew's site. And then for Derek's, it was a combination of 2 things. It was 1 from his written work, because he has plenty of it out there, and 2 from an interview that I did with him as well, and private conversations. So, decide what the key source is going to be, and then I'll tell you in a minute, during the writing process, you integrate lots of smaller sources as well. So here is how, again, high level, how I write them. 1, I open up Google Drive. 2, I just start writing. And the goal is to get on the page like a really rough outline. Maybe it's not in order yet. Maybe it doesn't make sense to anybody else but me, but there's words on the page. And then from there, you start to fill them out in a way that it makes it not necessarily chronological, but a logical flow of ideas that becomes a how-to guide from start to finish. So, for example, how to get 10,000 subscribers. Thing 1, make sure your website is optimized to capture those people. Thing 2, this is how you promote yourself online. Thing 3, here are some, more techniques for doing whatever. I forgot what the exact logical flow was, but, get it into that order, fill out, turn sentences into paragraphs, turn paragraphs into sections, and, don't be afraid to move stuff around. I remember writing an essay in high school, as far back as high school, where I wrote the entire thing. I thought it was beautiful. And then somebody came along and said, this very last paragraph should be at the beginning. I moved it there and it became so much better. So, move stuff around, play. And the sections broke down really simple. There was the introduction, right? Introduction, I just give people really clear idea of what to expect. I introduce the main source. I provide a table of contents, because table of contents sets you apart from the millions of blog posts out there that are 300 words long. The body itself is catchy headline, quote, usually a quote, and then 2 or 3 paragraphs max, right? Keep sections short, because again, if they're too long, you're doing something wrong. You haven't broken it down granular enough. And if they're too short, does it really need to be a section of its own? All of those get lists and pictures and links and tables, anything you can do to break up the text. Getting somebody to sit down and read 1,000 words is tough. Getting them to sit down and read 10,000 words, it's a whole other game. It's, as long as there's a short book or an ebook or something like this. And that's rinse or repeat until you get to the end, and then a very, very short conclusion. I mentioned that there are a couple of more things I add. For example, sources. Where do other sources come from? 2 places. 1, if, for example, you interview me and I say, a great tip for copywriters is to read George Orwell's Politics and the English Language. It contains these rules about blah, blah, blah. So instead of just saying, Michael says read George Orwell's essay, you actually go to that source and you link to it and you give a bullet point list of the 7 main things from that essay. So now you've done the reader's work for them. You've provided an extra layer of value. The second source is, as you go through, your main source isn't going to have all the answers. Like when I interviewed Ramit, it was comprehensive, but it was only an hour long. And we could have talked about surveying audiences for an hour. We could have talked about offering guarantees for an hour. But no, we covered the whole product creation gamut. So when you go to talk about guarantees, all of a sudden there's these other questions that readers might have, and you have to have answers for them. It's not really fair to go back to the same source, and it's not necessarily the best value for them either. So then you go to, Tim Ferriss talks about guarantees. What does he say about it? Google. Or, Neil Patel says whatever, or Derek says whatever. So you go to these other sources that might have the answer that you're looking for, right? Maybe it's Tim, maybe it's Neil, maybe it's Derek, whoever it is. Sometimes you don't know who has the source. So again, you Google it, you look for something credible. You don't have to spend a lot of time before you come to the top result, or before you come to, that's an article about this specific topic that has lots of comments and shares. That's probably a good one to link to. Read it quick, reference it into your work, and and then move on. The other thing I'd add is like revise ruthlessly. Being a good writer, you know, I've had a ton of practice. You've had a ton of practice. You know that it's iterative. You become better over time. But even once you reach a higher level, like I still obsessively edit anything. My articles that are online, you know, people have told me that, you know, some people have said read it all the way through, and I go, great. And some people said they printed it out and highlighted it, and I go, wow. And some people said they've read it, you know, a dozen times, and I go, that's incredible. But I've read it 100 times because I was the guy that wanted every single word to be perfect. I think it's, you know, it's a pride thing. It's something internal. It's also respect for the readers because, you know, if these articles are long, I don't want somebody to read 12,000 words when I can say the same thing in 8, right? Try to use less words. Try to use smaller words. Try to get rid of anything that's fluff. Try to, you know, not be repetitive because all of these things take away from the quality of the writing. If you're not an editor yourself, you know, if you just don't have the ability or don't want to develop it, hire somebody to do it. You know, there's so many websites where people make themselves available for cheap. Here, it's, you know, Craigslist, Kijiji. There's also Fiverr. You know, you could find a reasonably good editor to do this for $5, $10, $20, and it will pay for itself, I promise you. Even if you're doing the article for free, when you put something out there that has a wow factor that's extremely well written, it can lead to a lot more, which I expect we'll talk about this in this interview. So that's the high level, right? The high level that took 10 minutes about how to write one of those big articles. And then the last piece is publishing it, which if you publish on your own site is really easy. If you publish it as a guest post, there's a whole other series of things you got to do.
Love it. Yeah, I love how you went, you know, very deep into how you have to, you know, go through the content, edit and stuff like that. I know, especially when I was starting out, and I know other people when they're starting out, like also you, when you just start out with blogging, you're like, okay, I'm gonna write something down for 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna click send, and then nobody reads it, right? I think everyone has experienced something like that. Now, as a comparison, when you created these guides, I would say like, if I would say like 10 or 20 hours, I think that would be very, very low. You probably like putting like, I don't know, maybe even 100 hours into creating just one of these guides, right?
I stopped counting after 30.
Yeah, exactly. So many people, I think, don't really understand how much effort goes into this. And if you want to get a bigger, you know, picture on how to become better at writing, a book that I read recently was On Writing Well. It goes into this process of editing and, you know, as you said, you know, making shorter verbs, you know, making more active words, stuff like that. Like, there's a ton of stuff that you can edit. And once you do that once with one article, and you invest like 10 or 20 hours into just writing one blog post, it's going to make a huge difference for your audience. It's going to be so much better, and because of that, you're also going to get probably disproportionate results. So before you were wondering like, hey, why is nobody sharing this? Why is nobody reading this? And then all of a sudden, when you start creating really, really high quality content, everything can turn around really, really fast, and the effort pays off. And then also you have a lot of people who tend to write blog posts and they want to write one a day. Well, then, you know, once you try to do that, this just doesn't become possible anymore. But, you know, if you follow a company, what you really care about usually is, you know, awesome content. Even if it comes out once every 2 weeks or once a month, you want to read something awesome every 2 weeks instead of, you know, reading just fluff every single day. Because nobody has time for that, and there's just too much competition on such low level. But then once you get on a higher level, you can see that there's actually not that many people doing that. For example, for productivity, there's tons of people writing about top 10 productivity tips, but writing deep articles, diving deep into their issues, there's very, very little of that. That's really high quality content. So that's something, you know, to play around with.
I completely agree.
Exactly. So now let's take a look at, you know, you say you start writing one of these guides, and it's the same as starting every other project. Like, especially if the process is long, if it takes like more than 30 hours, you can't do it everything at once. So I know something that happens to me very often is that, after the initial momentum, there just comes time where you lose the motivation, you don't feel like writing, it doesn't seem fun, and you get that urge to just switch to something else and switch to another thing or something like that. I'm curious if that happens to you as well, and if yes, how do you get unstuck?
I have a bit of a completion complex. So if I start something, I do everything I can to finish it. That's kind of built in as a predisposition. Something that maybe other people can relate to is books, right? Like you pick up a book, you start reading it, you're halfway through, and then you realize like, well, actually this is kind of boring. But so many people will finish it anyways because, we want to see to the last page, partly for the fulfillment, and, maybe there is some small interesting element to the book. I'm like that with almost everything. It's like start, better finish for, internal gratification. Another thing, though, is creating accountability. Whenever you can have external accountability, you're going to get it done, and you're more likely to get it done. For example, for me, with the interviews, I booked a whole bunch of them in advance because, Primoz, if I tell you I'm going to be here at 12 noon on Thursday, I'm going to be here at 12 noon. Or 10 minutes later because I was prepared my notes. But we're going to be really close, right? With client work, like if I've told a client that I'm going to get something done, I don't care how much work it is, I don't care how close the due date is, I'm going to get it done. Because that's the level that you have to operate at if you want to continue having that client. Yeah, if you want to continue moving upwards. So I think that as far as tips for other people for completion for finishing things, take pride in your work, right? You've started something. Version 1 of everything I do is terrible, but I know that it's the only way to get to version 2, right? Trust that your version 2 is going to be better, that it's going to be something that you're proud of, that it's going to be something that maybe leads to more opportunities, money, whatever. I think that'd be the key tip.
Cool. Okay, so as we move a bit forward, you've written this guide, and let's say that you've edited it, and you feel like it's really good. What do you do with it then? Like, I know that there's a couple of options, and we can, maybe you can talk a little bit about each of them. One of them is obvious to just publish it to your readers. Another one is to let the person that you're writing about, or even multiple people that you're writing about, to mention it to them. And then the third option is to actually use that as a guest post on another blog or something like that. So can you give like a specific system that you use for each of these things? Okay, maybe not for sending it to your subscribers, but let's say, how do you mention it to someone so that, they will actually take a look at it, maybe share it with their followers? And then how do you create a guest post that's going to, blow away minds of other people?
Yeah, so I think the first part is, as you've kind of mentioned throughout, as we've mentioned throughout, that I do repurpose content. So one great interview can become a great written guide on your site. It can become a guest post on another site. It can become a PDF article that you give away. And in my experience, that's quite successful. So what I look for, my system is mutual benefit. I usually offer it as a guest post first because they like to have original content. It provides, probably more traffic to the interview guest I had than I can otherwise provide them. It provides, links both from that site and from me, and there's the built-in audience that's going to be sharing it as well. So I think about guest posts first. After that, turn it into a PDF, which sometimes you can download it from the article, sometimes I give it away on my site. That's been very, very successful for me. If you go to michaelalexis.com, it's very simple. All you can do is sign up, and about 40% of people do. My understanding is that that's very high. And there's been no complaints that, this information is available elsewhere. My assumption is because, the content is that good. I don't know. And, systems for reaching out to promote is actually something that I'm not going to take credit for being really, really good at. I do reach out to the people that I interviewed. I'll say, hey Ramit, article is up here. Let me know if there's any changes you want to make. Thanks. Done. Because busy people don't want paragraphs and paragraphs of information. I used to, I drop these things on Facebook or I drop them on Twitter, but I wasn't actively promoted in the way that other people that I think are significantly better. I know you know Naveed.
Yeah.
He's very, very good at making sure every single piece of his content is promoted where it needs to be. I think Selena Su is quite good as well. So these are the people you should be studying, not me.
Cool. Okay, so you mentioned guest posts. You did get a lot of, people to do interviews with you, and you did get a lot of people to do guest posts with you. Now, I know that, for example, Ramit has one of his frameworks to reach out for guest posts, and many people have different ones. What's your framework like? Let's say that, I've decided that I want to create a guide on, let's say not Ramit, because like for many people who are starting out, that's going to be a bit harder. But let's say that you find a blogger that you want to, to make a guest post for them. How do you reach out to them? Like, what do you even write for them in an email? First of all, at the beginning, when you're just asking them, like, actually, do you ask them first? Do you ask for permission if you can do this for them, or do you just do it and send it to them? Let's go over that first.
I've done both ways, and one of those ways has gotten me into trouble. So Ramit's method you mentioned is, build relationship first, build it over possibly a long period of time, and then very slowly, here's some things I'd like to write about, would you be interested? And then actually write it and send it their way. For me, it's gone two ways. One, the articles kind of speak for themselves in quality. I have relied on the fact that almost anybody ought to be happy to publish one of these things. The trouble with that, though, is when you write something for a specific audience and it doesn't get published there, it's potentially a big waste of time. So, for example, the second article I wrote was the one about mixergy, how to build a recurring revenue business from scratch. I reached out to James Clear, who was doing Passive Panda at the time, and I said, hey James, I'm thinking about writing an article about X or Y. Would you be interested in this for, a Passive Panda guest post? Here's an article that I did that was similar. I linked to the Ramit one. Thanks, Michael. Very, very, very short. He wrote back, oh, hey, yeah, that sounds great. Please send it to me for review. I sent it to him a few weeks later because, again, these things take a long time to write. And in the meantime, his circumstances had changed. He decided that he didn't want to post guest posts on his site anymore. So that's totally fine, but it leaves me in the position where, I spent 30, 40 hours working on something for the Passive Panda audience. Where else can it go? And that article actually sat in my Google Drive. It must have been like 6 or 8 months before Manish Sethi's Hack the System site became a good platform for it, right? His site grew in that time. He started to focus on things that were a little bit better of a fit. So I reached out to him. He said, yeah, for sure, let's try it. And it actually worked out really well in the end. When it went live on his site, it proved to be a very, very good platform. His audience shared it. His audience boosted it up on Hacker News, and it brought in about 15,000 new people to his site. So things worked out in the end, but again, 6 months of kind of like that weighing on your shoulders. Where is it going to go? And then there's been other times where I've written guides and not pitched them in advance where it was a similar struggle, and they didn't necessarily end up in the best places they could be. So my advice would be, do what Ramit does. Yeah, be slow and methodical, and it will pay dividends.
Awesome. I want to dive into one of the things that you mentioned that people will probably just skim over, but no, it's super important. One of the things that you said is like, oh, when I reach out to someone, I send them an example of my past work, and usually it's really, really good. So here's the thing. Because of all of that process beforehand, because of all of that process that you went through to create, one of these guys that's super valuable, that's super high quality, this allows you to reach a lot of other influencers, because if you just write short blog posts, like people are not going to care. But if you write something that's amazing for, let's say, a guest post, then you can link to it when you pitch other influencers, and they're going to see, maybe they're even going to know it already, and it's going to be much, much easier for you to get the credibility that you need to just get started.
One of the proudest days I had as a writer was when that article went up again about Ramit on ProBlogger. It was called Ramit Sethi Exposed, how he makes millions blogging, something like this. So as soon as it went up, Ramit sent me an email that said, hey, it looks so great, thank you so much. I got an email from Andrew Warner that said, that's freaking amazing, I can't wait to read the whole thing. I got an email from Derek Halpern that said, dude, how do I get you to write these about me? I got an email from Chris Gillibo that said, good job. Other people have, James Altucher has commented on my work because I've linked out to him. There's just, there's something really feels good about getting that recognition from kind of high-level people in the industry. That you're right, doesn't happen unless you've done something different, that you've got that wow factor, and also linking out to them helps because then they know about it.
Cool. Okay, so now let's go even further. So let's say you've done this. Let's say you've written a guide. Somebody's very happy. They've got a lot of traffic to their websites. They thank you for it. But then, a big mistake that you could probably make is just say, okay, and then move on to the next person and the next person and the next person. So how do you stay in touch with these people and keep adding value to them?
Yep. So let's look at my relationship with Ramit as a quick case study. So the first time I interviewed Ramit was for Write Reviews. I told him, hey, can I please interview for this site? And I'll write an article about it for ProBlogger. We did the interview. I wrote a short, not particularly good article, but that's only in hindsight. It was probably fine at the time. From there, Ramit and I didn't talk for 4, 5, 6 months, but he has systems so that when he was ready to release Dream Job, he actually reached out to me. He said, can we please do another interview? I realize I'm talking about what he's done, not me, but again, we should learn from the people that do it very, very well. So he reached out to me. He said, can we please do another interview, write an article? That interview and article led to the big one, and then actually again I went on silent mode. I really try to respect how busy people are. Ramit gets, let's just say 300,000 emails a day, give or take. He doesn't need another one from me. So my perspective is, if you've had an hour-long conversation with somebody and there's been follow-up that's got that wow factor, they're going to remember you, right? You don't need to constantly be emailing them and checking in, etc. That being said, I do it somewhat in my profession now. I have a simple system that lets me keep in touch with business acquaintances that I've met for maybe a quick coffee or something like this, that I'd like that we can stay top of mind for each other for referrals, etc. And that looks like this. My calendar, once a month, beginning of the month, sends me a quick email, and it says, send your keep in the loop emails. Gives me my Google Drive document with a list of people that I contact monthly and quarterly, and then just go through them one by one with a quick email. And those emails are very, very short. They're, hey Primoz, quick update from me. This is what I'm working on. This is how something is going. Hope all is well with, specific thing they're doing. Thanks, Michael. Just very, very, very short. That'd be my tip. Keep it short.
Awesome. Yeah, that I think is a great system for, staying in touch with people. And I love it. Like, there's a lot of mini systems. Like, there's a script that you could probably even write up. There's a list of things. Then that's connected to your assistant, to your calendar, and all of those things. And I love it how, everything works together in the end and, just saves you so much time and other resources. Okay, so one last thing that I want to, talk to you about today is, how all of this hard work pays off in the end. Because, for example, if you go to michaelalexis.com, there's basically just a very basic site with an opt-in form. You can sign up for it, and then you get tons of value through your guides that you get access to, right? Now, it doesn't seem like you're making any money from this, and I don't think I got any pitches for any of your products or something like that in the past. So maybe some of the people will be wondering, like how did this benefit you? Like, what were the opportunities that opened up since you created those guides? Like, why should you even do it in the first place, apart from the attention that you get?
Yeah. So the email lists were that I have set up now was after I wrote all of these things, right? It wasn't live at the time. I put it up because it was easy to do, and it's the most low-risk email list ever because you get one email every couple of months, and I'm not going to sell you anything probably ever. So, yeah, it's the resources, the value that I created in the past, and how could we get that to more people without being too much work for me. So what did I get from it at the time, if not, growing a big email list or selling them products? 3 different things. One, the reason I wrote the Ramit article was, he had reached out to me for a favor, and he had done a favor for me in the past, right? The first time I interviewed him, I hardly had an audience, but he was willing to chat with me for an hour. And, beyond what that did for my site, an hour-long conversation with Ramit, as you know, can be life-changing. This is kind of how I measured it. Like, a 10-minute conversation with Ramit turns into a really good blog post, right? A short one. An hour-long conversation could be 5 or 6 posts, or it could be life-changing. So take the life-changing every time. That's what I got out of it. And actually, because, again, not intentionally, but because that second article I wrote about him was good, and because he knew he liked my communication style, and because I'd worked well with his team, etc., he actually reached out to me to work with him as a researcher, writer, etc. And let's come back to that in a minute, because I think it's very, very important. But quickly, what did I get from the others? Andrew, like I said, he was the first person I ever followed online. I really liked him. I wanted to do this for him. He later became a client, but right in the first one was, this is somebody I really respect online. Let's help him out how I can. I think he's got a good mission. He's coming from a good place with his business. And finally, the Derek ones, as I mentioned before, Derek asked if I'd write them for him, and we turned those into paid gigs. So actually, all of it turned into paid work through slightly different means. What I think is so important about this, and maybe a key takeaway for anybody listening, is it's okay to do work up front for free. Because again, if you have that wow factor, if you put your heart into it, if you do a really good job, well, it sounds kind of flaky, put your heart into it. If you do a really good job, if you revise it, 150 times until it's the best piece of writing you can produce, somebody's going to notice, it's going to create opportunity, and, pretty much every time for me, it led to work. So good. Why does this matter? Because it sets you apart from the 99.9% of people who, contact Ramit, Andrew, Derek, whoever, high-value clients, expecting something from them while offering nothing in return. And it doesn't work, right? There's too many of them. Ramit had, I forget the exact numbers of his list at the time, but he could have reached out to his email list. He needed a writer. He could have reached out to his email list and got 1,000 applicants. But instead, he sent one email to me, right? One email to the person that he knows, puts in the work, is like friendly, nice guy that sends him short emails, and that's hugely valuable for somebody that's trying to grow their business and respect their time, etc. So yeah, don't be afraid of doing free work, and make sure your free work is very good.
Awesome, love it. Okay, so all of these, all of the things that I do, usually, when you have a conversation with someone like you, which has been like incredibly valuable just for me, like I've learned a ton of new stuff. I'm sure the listeners have learned it as well. Like, the one thing that we always want to do is we want to, create systems and put these things into action. Especially the listeners, they're going to get the best results if they take the insights that they've learned from you and they put them into action. So what can they do right now to start that process, and how exactly can they, start becoming more generous, adding more value, both to the influencers and the people around them, and producing great content?
Yeah, so I have a simple little system that I use whenever I want to kickstart something. I hope this
awesome.
Very, very applicable. I call it the 5-day plan. What I do is I literally take a sheet of paper, and across the top, I write day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5 days, no more, no less. Along the left side, the things that you want to do each day. So, if it's business related, maybe those things are call 3 clients or set up you wouldn't set up a website every day, write a blog post. If it's health related, maybe it's, go for a 30-minute walk or, eat a certain kind of food. But make it really, really simple for the first 5 days. Give yourself 2 or 3 tasks and then make sure you check off each one every single day. I don't let myself sleep until they're all done. At the end of that 5-day period, you reassess. You create a new 5-day list and you can add things to it. Okay, that calling 3 clients today is going pretty well. I'm going to call 4 clients today or 5 clients a day. Or, the health one. Well, it turns out I hate walking outside because I live in Canada and it's really, really cold. So you take that off and you add yoga instead. So what that 5-day plan does for me is it gives me, it's not I'm going to do this for the next 6 months or I'm going to do this for years. It's 5 days. I can stick to that every time. And it gives you short bursts of extreme productivity with that constant reassessment. So something they can do today, create a 5-day plan.
Awesome. This is amazing. Love it. Love the system. Probably going to give it a shot myself even because I love different systems. So yeah, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day, Michael, to, come to the podcast, talk about your experiences. Now, where can people find you? Where can they, learn more about you? And what sites should they visit?
Yep. So 2 spots. One, again, michaelalexis.com. I feel like we've mentioned enough. The second is my law firm is alexislawyers.com. Likely not going to be relevant to too many people listening, but here's how somebody could do a favor for me, offer huge value for me. If you listen to this interview and you write an article about it, even something, you don't have to have a big audience. If you write an article about it, if you link to Alexis Lawyers and you use the keywords like Canada lawyer or Guelph lawyer or something like this, you'd provide huge value for me. I would appreciate it for the rest of my life. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much and chat with you soon. Bye.
Thanks so much. Take care.